it's Iowa Prairie Girl. I am here in Sarasota County, and in front of me I have a wild white indigo. This is one of my most favorite wildflowers. Why is it one of my most favorites? Well, if you read about wild indigo, often the words come up like are showy, striking, towering over other prairie plants. This plant gets to be about 3 to 6 feet tall, and as you're driving down the road, it's pretty hard not to notice the white wild indigo as it comes up in June and just stands over the other towers and just says, "Hey, look at me, here I am." So white wild indigo, as I said, I am in Sarasota County. If I didn't say that, I'm in Sarasota County, and I happen to be in a county ditch that was restored in 2004. It's 2008 or 2020 right now, so 16 years ago this was planted or restored. It is June. Don't let my my attire fool you. It's been a cool June rainy day, so I do have a flannel shirt on, but this plant does bloom in early summer, May into June, and so it is a cool evening here, so I do have a flannel shirt on. So I want to talk about the name Wild White Indigo. If you look into your flower field guides, you're going to see that it's often called white false indigo. And as I was doing some research and as I was reading, I read a small article that I had Googled. It was about 100 years ago, this author, and I wish I could refine that article so I could give that author credit. But this gal was talking about how she didn't like the name white false indigo. This plant is so beautiful, so showy, and again, those are the words that are used, showy and striking, that it doesn't deserve the word false. Now, why does it have the word false, or why is that in its name? So indigo comes from the plant in India. The true indigo comes from India, and that plant is used to make the color, the dye, the blue dye of indigo. And so you have indigo referring to the plant, but also referring to the color blue. So that is a true indigo. This plant also can be used for dye. There is a false blue indigo and there's the false white indigo. The color of the flower does not indicate the color of the dye. It is the dye comes from the leaves. So when we're naming the prairie flowers in North America and we're referring these plants to indigo, it's because they're in the same family. They're in that pea family, and they resemble indigo, but the word false means that it doesn't produce as good a dye as the indigo plant from India. So that's where the word false comes from. So we have wild, false, or false white indigo. So for the rest of this video though, I'm going to refer to this plant as white wild indigo because, again, it is just such a beautiful plant that you hate to use the word false with it. If we go over the characteristics or the description of this plant here, I don't know that you're going to need a lot of identification cues to find this plant. If you come across it, you're going to go, oh, there's that white wild indigo. But just to go over some of the characteristics of it, it does have a kind of grows almost into a bush. It's a large kind of bushy plant. The stem is a gray-green or a almost kind of, it's got a little purple gray into it. It is kind of waxy. It reminds you of a succulent. The leaves are also kind of a bluish green color, and they are compound, and they usually grow into like they're a trifold or a 3-leaflet. And again, that's where the dye comes from. And then the flower itself, it usually is in a spike here, like as you can see here. Here's the whole flower, it spikes. It blooms from the bottom up. I don't know if you can see, but the bottom blooms here are already have already bloomed. They're already spent, and they're starting to form a seed pod down here. So they bloom from the bottom, and then the last to bloom would be the top of the spike. The flowers are a very tight white petals together, and they have orange stamens, which is pretty cool. But to see the stamen, you actually have to kind of open it up to get it to look at that. And then the other really neat characteristic that I really like about it is that it has a blue-green calyx. And that is, the calyx is the combination of the sepals together. And these kind of really stay very prominent in the plant. So you remember the sepals are what forms the bud, and then when the flower opens, and a lot of times you can't really see the sepal because the flower, the plant blooms and the sepals are kind of underneath the petals. On here, the sepals are, the calyx or the sepals are still very prominent, and they're a really neat kind of a blue-green color. So I mentioned the pods forming. So these pods are just starting to develop here, and as they begin to form, they're green. And as they get bigger, they get to be about an inch or 2 inch long pod, and as they develop, they turn a black color. Another names for this plant could be rattlepod, rattlebush, and then horsefly weed. So rattlepod. Why is that called that? As these pods develop, they turn black and they dry out, and the seeds are in there and they shake. It used to be that early settlers would use the seed pods from Wild White Indigo for a baby rattle. The other part of this plant also, as those pods turn black, as this plant in the fall is spent, the whole plant will turn a black color. So even in the fall, you can identify Wild White Indigo very well because it keeps the same form, but it turns, the whole thing kind of turns, every piece of it turns black. And then it turns into a tumbleweed. It loosens up from the ground, and as the wind blows, it'll blow just like a tumbleweed. And that's how those seeds spread. It has the pods on them, and as it's blown across the prairie, the pods open up and scatter the seeds that way. So the other word that I use is horsefly weed. That's another name for this plant, horsefly weed, because they would take the dried up pods and you would tie them to the tails of the horses, and as the horses swish back their tails to scare off the flies, it would rattle that pod as well. So horsefly weed. You're going to find Wild White Indigo in open prairies. It prefers a full sunny area. You might find it in a real open woods or in a savanna prairie, but mostly you're going to find it out in the open. It is poisonous to cattle or livestock. They prefer not to eat it for obvious reasons. The Native Americans would use it for treating of wounds, and then also it was also a cathartic, meaning that it was used if someone needed to purge themselves. I don't know if that has to do with being poisonous to cattle as well, but it is used to clean someone out. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed my video on Wild White Indigo. I totally agree with the words that I've read in books where it describes the plant as majestic in appearance, as strikingly, as grand, as towering over the other plants. I hope that you get the opportunity to get out and find a Wild White Indigo, and that you too will find that it is just very appealing as one of the most beautiful wildflower prairie plants that we have here in North Iowa. So this is the Iowa Prairie Girl. Thank you for watching. I hope again that you get out and enjoy the outdoors, get some adventuring in there, and I hope that you see something wonderful.